Hello everyone, my name is Dr. Shagun Saklani Pandey and I am a faculty with the School of Social Work at Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Mumbai. The title of this current module is Child Marriage. It comes under the subject Criminology and under the paper titled Juvenile Justice. Through this module, you will get an understanding of the phenomena of child marriage. The major objectives of this particular module are to get an understanding of the phenomena of child marriage and how it impacts children across the globe. The other major objective of this module is to give you an understanding about what are the existing legal provisions and laws in India and abroad to protect the children's right against child marriage. This particular module has 6 sections. Section 1 will give you an introduction of child marriage. We will then explore the major causes of child marriages. Section 3 will bring out the international instruments to combat child marriage. Section 4 will talk about the legal measures that are existing in India to combat child marriage. Section 5 will give us the idea of some of the government initiatives to combat child marriage, and then we will be wrapping up with some concluding thoughts. So, let us begin with an introduction of what child marriage is. Marrying daughters in their early ages is a cultural practice in many societies, not just in India but also in other countries in Asia, Africa and Latin America. It is believed that marriage adds a social status to the family, and if a daughter remains unmarried, there is some sort of oddity involved in it. There is therefore a silent complicity to child marriage in a country like India and many other rural and backward communities. They treat this age-old practice as normal and an integral part of their culture. It is often seen that women are usually trained in the household tasks with the anticipation that they would take up household responsibilities in a larger capacity than men. Also, there is a deep-rooted gender inequality ingrained in our culture, wherein women are usually considered to be inferior to men. Child marriage is one of the worst forms of violation of child rights. Child marriage is still prevailing and widespread phenomena in India. It is really sad to see that India is a home to around 1/3 of the world's child brides. Half of Indian women also got married before the age of 18 years. Interestingly, it is also important here to highlight that worldwide more than 700 million women who are alive today were married as children. It is also estimated that there are around 23 million child brides in India, which approximately comes to around 40% of all child brides globally. According to the DLHS-3 survey of 2007 and 8, 43% of women between the age of 20 to 24 in India were married before they turned 18. Child marriage is one of the worst forms of rights violation of every child. It leads to an intergenerational socio-economic impact on education, health of these children and empowerment, and is both a symptom and a contributor to gender inequality. It also leads to an inverse impact on their health, physical growth, mental and emotional development and educational opportunities of every child. This child marriage leads to a vicious circle of poverty and also perpetuates gender discrimination. It further leads to high incidence of illiteracy, malnutrition, high infant and maternal mortality rates, vulnerability to gender-based violence and sexual abuse, and also trafficking. There is an increased number of miscarriages and low birth weight babies arising out of child marriages. According to the UNICEF report on State of World's Children 2012, There are many complications related to pregnancy and childbirth, and these are among the leading causes of death worldwide for adolescent girls between the age group of 15 and 19 years. It is also interesting here to highlight that it is not just girls but boys also who get affected by child marriage. There is a sudden economic responsibilities that they face, and many of them also experience an early childhood. Let us also now see what does the census 2011 say about the incidence of child marriage in India. It is heartening to see that around 2.9% and 1.6% of girls and boys in India respectively between the age group of 10 to 14 got married before they attained 15 years of age. Around 10% and 10.5% of total girls and boys respectively between the age group of 15 and 17 years are already married. The census 2011 also shows a declining trend. However, the incidence of child marriage in terms of numbers is still very high. States have shown diverse results. The Indian states of Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, Andhra Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, West Bengal, Haryana, Karnataka, Bihar and Uttar Pradesh have particularly alarming rates of child marriage. According to the National Family Health Survey 2005 and 6, around 47.4% of all young women who are currently between the age group of 20 to 24 were married before they turned 18 years. Also, around 16% of men aged between 20 to 49 years were married before they turned 18. 58% of all married women between 15 and 19 years have already experienced motherhood or current pregnancy. So far we have seen what child marriage means and what are some of the disturbing facts and figures across globe and also in India that bring out the conclusion that child marriage continues to be one of the most heinous crimes that is being committed against children. We shall now look into what are some of the causes of child marriage. One of the major reasons for child marriage is lack of education. Most of the girls who are forced to get married at a very young age have limited or no access and availability to education. Not just girls, but many a times they come from families they have had no access to education. In terms of girls' access to education, infrastructure also plays an important role. Many a times it is seen that in schools often this acts as a hindrance in continuing education. Lack of transport facilities to reach out to distant schools, no toilet facilities for girls are some of the reasons why many a times families do not prefer to send their girls to school. And this continues to be a significant contributing factor to keeping girls out of school and then forcefully putting them into a situation of child marriage. Other than this, the other major cause of child marriage in India is the social cultural practices. We often see that there exists a widespread awareness of the illegality of child marriage. However, despite of this awareness, the incidence of child marriage continues. One often argues that child marriage is a deep-rooted phenomena in our social cultural practices of our society. People continue to give more weightage to these age-old practices and traditions and also do not look at the laws that are present and other penalties that one might face. However, it is also seen that in some communities, the time when a girl starts menstruating, she is considered to be eligible for marriage. This age could be as young as between 10 years. So one can understand how girls are more vulnerable in such situations. The other major cause of child marriage in India is a lower preference that is being given to girls. Gender bias that starts from the birth of a child and continues till the end. Also, one sees that there still continues to be a boy-child preference. Boys being given preference in terms of education and girls being confined to household chores continues to be a major phenomena in many societies in India. Also, girls are often seen more eligible to take care of the younger siblings, and there is also the reality of dowry that exists in India today. However, we often see that girls are looked at as economic liabilities in our society. Women's engagement and involvement in the household work is also not given any economic value. In many societies, the dowry amount also increases with the increase in the girl's age. Therefore, many families prefer to get their girls married off at a very young age, so that they do not have to pay a hefty amount for their dowry. Hence, it can be argued that the incentive involved in the concept of dowry also perpetuates child marriage. The other major cause of child marriage in India can also be seen through the lens of weak enforcement of law. Despite of the legal measures in place to combat the phenomena of child marriage, the incidence of it have continued. There is also weak enforcement of law and other legal measures in India. There is often limited or no knowledge on how to apply laws, and there exists a little understanding of the consequences of the law, as well as there is a limited trust in the existing institutions enforcing these particular laws. This also undermines the implementation of laws related to child marriage. There are many other causes of child marriage in India, and one of them is also the limited knowledge about social protection programs. We have seen the government has launched many social protection programs in India. However, there continues to be less awareness about them. However, we also see that it has got to limited to conditional cash transferring, that is intended to delay child marriage by keeping girls in school. However, one has seen a real violation of these social protection programs also. Families have somehow not been able to completely comprehend the objective behind these schemes and programs. The major fallout of these conditional cash transfers often leads to a situation wherein it perpetuates dowry, since the parents use the grant amount for the purpose of giving away as dowry as soon as the girl turns 18 years of age. There also continues to be a lack of protective environment for a young girl. In India, marriage is also seen as a defense security strategy in a situation where there are very few options open for the development of women and children. One also sees that in India there continues to be a lack of will and action to combat child marriage, especially by the administration and also by judiciary. There is also a delay in the matters pertaining to child marriage. However, many a times child marriage goes unreported. Child marriage has still not taken up as a grave concern of child rights so far in India. We shall now be looking into some of the international instruments that are available to combat child marriage. It's interesting here to highlight that Goal 5 of the Sustainable Development Goal says about achieving gender equality and empowerment of all women and girls. Point 5.3 under this particular goal clearly states that elimination of all harmful practices such as child, early and forced marriage and female genital mutilation is a grave violation against child rights. Other than this, the Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, popularly known as CEDAW, and the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, the UNCRC, also continue to be an important tool to combat child marriage. CEDAW's Article 17 clearly states that the betrothal and the marriage of a child have no legal effect, and it requires the government to specify a minimum age of marriage and to make the registration of marriages in an official registry, and this is considered to be compulsory for all state parties. However, not directly but indirectly, the United Nations Convention on Rights of the Child also has laid down provisions that apply to child marriage. Article 24 of the UNCRC states that the state party shall abolish all the traditional practices prejudicial to the health of children. Article 34 of the UNCRC states that the state party needs to protect children from all forms of sexual exploitation and sexual abuse. The UNCRC committee has consistently dealt with child marriage in its concluding observations to state party. It has often highlighted what India's position is in the field of child marriage. However, let us also highlight some of the recommendations that are given by CEDAW and CRC in the sphere of child marriage. It has suggested one has to raise the minimum age of marriage to 18 for both women and men. It also talks about conforming regional, customary and religious law with federal and civil law. It further talks about defining crime of rape as sexual intercourse without consent and not as an attack on honor. It further states that it needs to provide for sanctions against perpetrators of early marriage and to ensure the investigation of cases as well as the prosecution and punishment to all perpetrators. It also talks about eliminating all disparities between men and women regarding minimum age requirement. The further recommendations in this field are for implementing compulsory registration of all marriages. It also talks about prioritizing the best interest of girls, including the right to education. However, it also further talks about not invoking freedom of religion to justify discrimination against girls and practices such as forced and early marriages. It also talks about not allowing exception to minimum age of marriage even with consent of the child or the family. So far in this particular module, we have looked at the phenomena of child marriage. We have tried to understand what are some of the major causes of child marriage specifically in India and how it impacts children. We have also looked at what are some of the international measures in place to combat child marriage. We shall now look into the legal measures in India. In India, the Child Marriage Restraint Act CMRA of 1929, which is popularly known as the Sharda Act, was a landmark act for child marriage. This particular act prohibited marriage of girls and boys before the age of 15 and 18 years respectively. However, in 1978, the Sharda Act was amended and the minimum age for marriage for girls and boys was raised up to 18 and 21 years respectively. However, this particular act has also come with its own limitations. We will be highlighting some of the limitations of Sharda Act here. Sharda Act only aimed at restraining solemnization of child marriage in the country and it did not talk anything on its prevention and prohibition. The procedures that were laid down by the Sharda Act against solemnization of child marriage were also very cumbersome, and it was also very time consuming. Sharda Act also did not identify any authorities responsible for preventing child marriages. This often led to a lot of confusion about what happens and whom do we need to report when we have an incidence of child marriage. Other than Sharda Act, the Prohibition of Child Marriage Act PCMA of 2006 was enacted by the Parliament on 10th January 2007. The PCMA Act came into force on 1st November 2007. Section 2A of PCMA Act laid prohibitions on marriage of girls below the age of 18, and for boys it was below the age of 21 years. Section 10, 11 and 15 of the PCMA Act talk about the basic premise on which the making of any child go through marriage is considered to be an offence. PCMA Act provides provisions for the protection and relief to the victims. It also enhanced punishment for those who are found guilty or those who are found involving in promoting child marriage. The overall provision of this PCMA Act can be broadly divided into prevention, protection and prosecution of offenders. We shall now be looking into these categories in more details. Let us start with the prevention under the PCMA Act of 2006. Section 5 of this Act, the solemnization of child marriage is cognizable and a non-bailable offence. Section 16 states that the Child Marriage Prohibition Officers or the CMPOs are to be appointed in every state to prevent any incidence of child marriage and to ensure protection of the victims as well as prosecution of the offenders. Further to this, Section 13 of the PCMA Act also states that the courts have the power to issue injunction for prohibition of child marriage from taking place. Section 12 and 14 of the Act talks about child marriage being declared null and void if the injunction prohibiting a child marriage from taking place is violated or contravened, or if the child is taken away from their lawful guardian by enticement, force or use of deceitful means, or is often sold or trafficked for the purpose of marriage. Section 10 of the PCMA Act further lays down the penal provisions for those who solemnize child marriage. Section 13, 4 and 16 3D of the CMPO and the District Collector are responsible for sensitization and for also the awareness creation in the community. So this has also put some responsibility on other government stakeholders. Now we shall be looking at the protection that is laid down under the PCMA Act. Section 3.2 and Section 3.3 of the Act says that the law makes child marriages voidable by giving choice to the children in the marriage to seek annulment of their marriage. Section 4 of the PCMA Act talks about providing for maintenance and residence of the female contracting party. Section 5 and 6 further talks about giving a legal status to all children born from child marriages and makes provision for their custody and maintenance. Section 16, Part 3G of the law of the Act provides for all support and aid. These would include the medical aid, the legal aid, counseling and rehabilitation support to children once they are rescued. The Child Marriage Prohibition Officer or the CMPO has under this Act been empowered with certain powers. They have the power to provide for necessary aid to the victims of child marriage. They can further provide legal aid to the victims. Section 32 of the Juvenile Justice, Care and Protection Act of Children for 2000 was also amended in 2006, has talked about how to produce children in need of care and protection before the Child Welfare Committee or a first-class judicial magistrate where there is no Child Welfare Committee in place. Further to this, we also will now look at what are some of the prosecutions that are laid down for the offenders of child marriage under the PCMA Act. Section 9 of the PCMA Act talk about the law providing for punishment for an adult male above 18 years of age marrying a child. Section 10 of this Act lays down punishment for those who are performing, conducting and abetting a child marriage. Further to this, Section 11 of the PCMA Act prescribes punishment for promoting or permitting solemnization of child marriage, and these would include the parents, the guardian or any other person or association or organization who are solemnizing child marriage. Section 11(1) of the PCMA Act lays down that the law clearly states that women offenders in any of the above categories cannot be punished with imprisonment. However, they can be penalized by way of imposition or a fine. Now, we shall also be looking at what are some of the responsibility under the PCMA Act. In case of any incidents of child marriage, whom do we report? So, here we are listed down some of the important stakeholders: the police, the child marriage prohibition officer or any such person as may be appointed to assist him or her. This can also be reported to a first-class judicial magistrate or a metropolitan magistrate. Incidents of child marriage can also be reported to the Child Welfare Committee or a member of the Child Welfare Committee set up under the Juvenile Justice Act. It can further be reported to Childline and also to the district magistrates. We shall now be looking at some of the government initiatives in India to combat child marriage indirectly. Direct measures to combat child marriage have been brought out by the PCMA Act. However, there still exists a gap. There is a lack of awareness about these acts. There is also weak implementation and a lax in enforcement of these acts. There also continues to be gaps and loopholes in the policies. Also, there have been administrative challenges in this particular field. There is also a lack of awareness of these policies and programs among both the implementers and the intended beneficiaries, and they have limiting in their effectiveness. However, the government has brought out several government schemes in India to protect especially the girl child. Some of the schemes like the Ladli and Balika Samriddhi Yojana that intends to delay marriage by keeping girls in school is one of them. Other than that, the Integrated Child Development Scheme, Ujjwala and Swadhar are also some steps that have rolled out by the Government of India to bring out a larger change in the society with a special focus on girl child. Also, there have been other commissions in place to empower girls and women. We have policies like that of the National Policy for Empowerment of Women 2001, the National Youth Policy 2002, the National Plan of Action 1992 and 2005, 10th and 11th 5-year plans from 2002 and 7 and 2007 and 12 respectively. So far in this module, we have looked at the phenomena of child marriage and how it impacts children, both boys and girls. We have further looked at what are some of the international measures in place to combat child marriage. We have also looked at some of the legal measures and laws that are available in India to combat child marriage and also protect children from this menace. We have looked at what are the different responsibility holders and how an incidence of child marriage can be reported. We shall now wrap up this session with some concluding afterthoughts. Despite of legal measures and government's effort in place, we still see that child marriage continues to be a reality in many parts of India. Although one has seen that there has been a drop in the incidence in census of 2011 over child marriage, however, this decline is very slow and the incidence of child marriage still continue. There is also a need to develop a broad, multifaceted strategy to target different aspects of this problem of child marriage, including deep-rooted social norms and behaviors, the perceived low value of girls, limited access to education, exposure to violence, restricted freedom of movement, and economic vulnerability. So friends, in this module on child marriage, we have covered a large gamut to understand this particular phenomena and how it impacts children. We have broadly looked at the phenomena of child marriage, what are some of the causes of child marriage, especially in India. We have also looked at what are some of the international laws and provisions in place for the protection of the rights of children affected by child marriage. We have also looked at what are some of the causes of child marriage in India, what are some of the societal issues that still exist that have led to more incidents of child marriage. We have also looked at what are some of the laws and provisions available in India to combat child marriage. These particular laws have also brought out what are the prevention, protection and prosecution measures in place to combat child marriage. However, I strongly recommend that to get a detailed idea of this particular phenomena of child marriage legally, it's important for you to go through the detailed module. It is very important that child marriage is completely eradicated from our society. For this particular reason, we all must be aware about the legal provisions and measures in place. And we also should become active agents in combating any incidents of child marriage that exists. Thank you.